Get started. All right. So first, big welcome to everybody who's joining today. We really appreciate your time and hope that you guys enjoy the session today. So we're going to be discussing energy solutions for the greenhouse. And as you may have already heard these gentlemen talking, we have some very special guests with us. So I will introduce them momentarily. I just need to do a few housekeeping items. So first and foremost, a brief disclaimer that I'm going to read out loud as quickly as possible. So John, oh, you've got it open, great. Okay, so this presentation and the information contained herein are provided without a prejudice basis and does not constitute, nor should be construed to constitute legal advice or a guarantee, offer, a representation, or warranty on behalf of Toromont. The panel members will be offering suggestions to several possible customer scenarios. The answers given by the panel members should be used as a guide. So there, that was quick and easy. All right. So just one other quick reminder before we get into intros, we are recording today's session. So that recording will be made available to every registered attendee following the webinar today. And also please feel free to post any questions that you have during our Q&A portion, which is the second half of the webinar today, using your Q&A function on the screen, and we will address as many as we can in the second half. And if we don't get to it, we will follow up afterwards. All right, so let's introduce our guest speakers today. So our first guest is Ralph DeBoer from Rosa Flora Limited. Rosa Flora was established in 1978 and has become one of the largest wholesale distributors of Gerbera daisies in North America. Did I say that right, Ralph? There's many ways to say it, right?
Yeah, that was good, Megan. Yeah,
okay, awesome. So they have 1.9 million square feet of greenhouses and growing, and a fleet of 20 refrigerated trucks and a cooler of over 35,000 square feet. That's large. They pride themselves in being one of the freshest premium flowers available, and being just hours from harvest to delivery makes them truly locally grown. So Ralph, thank you for joining us today. And our second guest today is Paul Dyck, who owns Great Lakes Greenhouses, which has been family owned and operated for 38 years. Great Lakes is the largest grower, shipper, and packer of hydroponic cucumbers in North America. They have a 118-acre state-of-the-art facility located on one site in Leamington, Ontario, which gives them the ability to provide year-round production to service all their customers' needs. Their mandate is to produce the healthiest and safest food in the market. For anyone on the call who's not had the opportunity to see Ralph's beautiful flowers or taste Paul's amazing mini cucumbers, I highly, highly suggest you do so. All right. And our last, but not least, guest speaker is Joe Van Schaick. Joe Van Schaick is our EPG market manager with Toromont. And Joe has been with Toromont for how many years now, Joe?
A lot, Megan.
A lot?
We're running into our fifth decade.
Fifth decade. Okay, that's good. We'll leave it at that. And thank you, Joe, for being here. Joe's going to also participate and address some questions as they get asked. So with that, John, can you move to the next slide? All right. So today's format, we're just going to be asking Ralph and Paul a couple of questions and allow them to provide their expertise. So the first question, I'll start with Paul. Paul, what is your viewpoint on on-site generation versus purchasing power from the grid?
Okay, I'm gonna speak as openly and transparently as I can. When we started doing our own on-site generation, we did it because we thought it was profitable. or we knew that it was profitable. And we've been off the grid now for the 5 years in February. So we're just a little over 5 years, like completely off the grid, like 100%. But now this the Class A program has come to light, and we've applied for it, and we've achieved, I guess, qualification, because we're on the Class A now, the Class A program, and that's extremely aggressive hydro pricing. Like we're in the 3 cent range, and we can't generate it for that. Just in very general terms, I always kind of figure we just the cost of gas, like to run our cogens, we're probably in the 5 to 5.5 cent range. And then if we keep our energy, which we do the majority of the time, if we keep our heat, our waste heat, we would pick up another 2.5 or 3 cents there. So if you do the math on that, you're looking, 3 cents, 3.5 cents with heat recovery. And that's not counting capital or, operating or any of that stuff. But before Class A, it was lucrative. Now with Class A, I'm not so sure, but we're continuing on with it, not from a cost standpoint, but from an availability standpoint. Like we can't get the megawatts here. Like it's not possible. We just tried, we had an application in for a period of time, and we were denied. I guess yesterday or the day before, they actually sent us an email, no megawatts available for us. And I think they left it, they phrased it, it will be quite some time before there is. So to me, that means several years. So yeah, when we started it 5 years ago, it was a moneymaker. Now it no longer is, but now we're continuing on it with a larger scale, and we have more plans on the horizon here, but not for cost, but for just the sheer availability of the power. Like we're expanding into lights. I think the whole area here is going to do a lot more of that. And yeah, we need the megawatts, and we can't get them, so we have to make them.
Okay, Paul, can I ask, because we know that the ISO has announced the construction of a new transmission line for Southwestern Ontario, I think, which they expect to be in service by 2028. I know that people have talked about there needs to be greater action. There will be greater action required in order to, address the pace of demand growth in your area. Do you anticipate, in that time frame, will there be capacity, or is that the capacity that's coming in, is that kind of accounted for already by other greenhouses?
Well, Hydro One won't tell you much. At least they won't tell us much. I think there's 200 megs online right now, or 200 or 300 out of the 800 or 900 that I think are going to come. 300 are there. I think I don't know exactly the dates, but it's there's a plan. But the queue for the megawatts, it's big. A lot of growers are looking to light. And one of the things that I've always kind of struggled with is, like, we could have put an application in, 5 years ago for 50 megawatts and not take one. And you know what I mean? So it's a little bit misleading. Like there might be 300-400 megawatts spoken for, but when it comes to time to actually put your name on the line, there might be quite a few guys backing out. That's my suspicion. But yeah, so I really don't know. We can't really get a straight answer from them. At least nothing that we can forecast with accurately.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
So Ralph, over to you. Do you have any comments on site versus generation versus purchasing power from the grid? We know you have quite a few years of experience with it, so.
Yeah, it's a great question. We could probably spend most of the webinar talking about just this question alone. I think it depends. It depends. There's a lot of variables there, Megan, and yeah, Paul hit on many of them, and we're similar in many ways in terms of what Paul described. I guess some context for us, we started this in 1991-92 when the then Ontario Hydro offered a non-utility generation contract, and there was a few proponents of that in Ontario at the time. So we started in 92 with two Caterpillar 3516s, 2 times 800 kilowatts, and those units are still running today. they started out as contracted engines, so it was yeah, we could use the power on our side of the meter if we wanted it or needed it, but we could also export it to the Ontario grid. So the advantage in that case was say on-site generation versus grid power. Yeah, that gave us the ability to generate ourselves if we wanted to, and circumstances were favorable for that, or we could take it in power in from the grid, but it also allowed us to export and have some revenue generation. So that there's one element to the answering that question. Another point to touch on for greenhouses specifically, and we did that early on in the 90s, was not only generation of electricity was usually the primary driver, but of course, as Paul alluded to as well, you get the heat for the greenhouse. But in addition to that, we were able to clean up the exhaust and take the CO2 from these engines and inject them into the greenhouse for CO2 fertilization as well. Which so as a greenhouse grower, that was sort of the third advantage for us in terms of energy. You've got the energy of the electricity, you've got the thermal energy for heating the greenhouses, but you also have the opportunity, if you choose, to clean up the exhaust a little bit and send that CO2 to the greenhouse for the plants. A couple other minor points there. Advantages of being on the grid versus self-generation. The grid does have advantages, and again, Paul, indicated this. When pricing is high from the grid, of course, you want to self-generate. But if you're in an environment where, for whatever reason, price from the grid is low, certainly times of day or Class A customers or adjustments to things like global adjustment, taking power from the grid can be better than self-generation as well. In our sort of 30-year or so history of this, we've got multiple generations of Caterpillar generators here still running today, and maybe different than Paul. I wouldn't say we're off the grid, but we're on the grid and we're off the grid. We can run our facility fully islanded if we so choose, but depending on the circumstances, we will either be a net importer of power, if that makes sense, or we can be a net exporter of power as well. So we try to dip our feet into sort of both fields if we can, when it's favorable for both ourselves and or the grid. There are times where contractually we export power for the Ontario grid, and we've got arrangements with the province to do that.
Right, thanks. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's some feedback there. That's a key element that we often talk about is flexibility with your assets. If that's a great example of having an asset over a long period of time, and you've been able to flex and leverage your asset in different ways. So really great. Thanks, Ralph. That's excellent. Thanks, both of you. So I think we can move on to the next question. So next question is, can you comment on what things you have implemented within your greenhouse that have allowed you to better control your energy costs? So there may be crossovers here, but Ralph, we'll start with you. I know that there's, beyond just your self-generation plant, there's a number of things that you've done to control energy costs. So.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Megan. Yeah, it's lots of stuff. Yeah, where do you start with that? When it comes to conserving energy, it's greenhouses are, I think, very similar to maybe even the way we all operate our homes. Just, of course, the greenhouse is on a much larger scale. So basic things like having an energy efficient greenhouse. So when you can generate more heat to try to warm your greenhouse, or you can just try to have an efficient greenhouse to try to keep the heat in. So certainly over the years, we've tried to build a very efficient greenhouse. In our case, our greenhouses are made of a 16 millimeter acrylic product. It's a double walled membrane, a rigid membrane that insulates very well. So in the summer, it does a good job of keeping the greenhouses a little bit cooler because of that insulation factor of the greenhouses. And in the winter, of course, it keeps the heat in. So that's one strategy, is certainly building a greenhouse that's energy efficient. Another big variable for greenhouse growers is controlling the amount that we vent our greenhouses. So most greenhouses have a way of venting with windows or vents, similar to your house. So of course, if it's -20 outside, and you can cool your house by turning your furnace down, or you can cool your house by opening your windows. Most of us wouldn't open our windows in the middle of winter. So certainly it sounds silly, but as growers, making sure that we're managing that element of our greenhouses properly. So the type of greenhouse we build, the way we operate them. Another big one is the types of crops that we grow. Whether you're a floral grower or a vegetable grower, some crops do use more energy than others in terms of heat and light. So all things being equal, as growers, we would, if we can and where we can, choose to grow a crop that might not need as much heat and light. Obviously, a cool crop will cost you less in energy. So those are a few things that we've done. Another a big practical one that many greenhouse growers have adopted over the years is using things like energy curtains. So not only does your greenhouse structure keep the heat in, but we also have multiple layers of greenhouse curtains that act as thermal breaks to keep the energy in the greenhouse, especially when the sun goes down or the lights are off. The curtains closed to try to keep that heat in the greenhouse. Yeah, as it specifically relates to combined heat and power on the energy side, I think people like Toromont and Caterpillar certainly in tandem with the growers have developed really good ways of extracting as much energy as possible, especially thermal energy off these engines as possible. In our case, changing things over the years, even to use a high-grade heat, high-temperature heat, and also a low-grade heat from things like aftercoolers and exhaust. Taking the exhaust temperature instead of maybe down to 120 C, taking it down to 40 or 50 C, using a low-grade heat of maybe 40 or 50 C, which for many people would be waste heat, but for us as greenhouse growers, we can use what we call that low-grade heat to heat our greenhouse. So that's another big one for us, is taking full advantage of every bit of thermal energy that might be coming off that generator.
Great. No, that's very interesting. Excellent. Thanks, Ralph. So Paul, do you have any comments on what you've implemented to reduce energy costs?
Yeah, as Ralph was talking there, like a lot of things came into my mind, like some of the stuff that we've done a few years ago, you kind of don't think about it anymore, but even like 5 or 7 years ago, there was a lot of projects that weren't implemented yet. And not to put in a kicker for our local utility, but they've been instrumental in helping us to prioritize some of these projects, these energy incentive projects. That would be Enbridge. Like they have some pretty interesting incentives, and we're taking advantage of them as much as we possibly can. So I just kind of wrote a few things down here, like boilers. We've kind of found that running larger boilers is much more efficient than running numerous smaller boilers. So we've taken advantage of that by installing some large industrial, or actually one large industrial boiler, which takes the place of 7 smaller traditional greenhouse boilers. So that's helped a lot. One of the things that we've started to do is install triple poly. Like we don't have polycarbonate greenhouses like you do, Ralph, or acrylic. We've got all poly, traditional double poly. And we started doing a little bit of trialing on triple layer poly. Actually, we started to do it on some sidewalls back in 2014. And we found some really interesting results. And then we went to the next level and we did some roofs on some ranges, and we've done it all now. We have the whole farm is all triple poly, like every bit of it. And there's different films as well. It's not just about having 3 layers of plastic. It's about having 3 layers of thermoplastic. That's made another difference as well. All of these things that I've described here are all rebatable through the local utility. I'm sure yours would be the same. You probably have the same mandates as we do. Energy curtains, like you alluded to them, like we've taken advantage of them as much as possible. It's also a good growing tool. It's not just an energy conservation thing. It's about a light control tool for our crops. And stack heat recovery, condensing economizers off the boilers, condensing economizers off the generators. That's something that we've taken advantage of. And my latest one is installing a cat generator. Like the cat, I think, Joe, is about 11% more efficient than what I've been running here now before.
Yes.
So that in itself is quite a value, along with a condensing economizer. Yeah, and just, you know, in general, we've noticed quite a benefit of calibrating our sensors on a regular basis, keeping the sensors clean, you know, making the fans make sure the fans are running in the aspirators, just basic housekeeping, like almost growing 101. That kind of thing really it adds up. Those little items, they add up to make a big difference, not only from an energy consumption but from an environmental standpoint. Like the greenhouse environment's better. So that's the big stuff that we've been working on. Yeah, and it's made quite an impact. Like we've been expanding our greenhouse at a pretty steady rate, and our fuel consumption per acre has been consistently dropping. And yeah, it's all these little things combined.
Wow, interesting. Great. Okay, thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ralph. All right, so next question, please. So this is an interesting one. I see Ralph smiling. How do you remain competitive against continental competition, where in some cases the cost of electricity or their cost of electricity is much lower than in Ontario? And the reason I ask this, I recall speaking with one greenhouse, and they made the decision to expand in Georgia because they could get 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And there was other incentives as well involved in that, but I know that it can be a challenge. So Ralph, we'll start with you.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time, you know, how do you remain competitive? Yeah, it is tough, and it's something as growers in Ontario, we've been, you know, trying hard to work with our local utilities and our province to say, you know, let's try to level the playing field. There's been a lot of years where the price of power in Ontario was significantly higher than a lot of other Canadian jurisdictions, and certainly higher than most American states, especially many of the Great Lakes states that we might compete with directly. So trying to have a level playing field with respect to energy costs, but as I think everybody can appreciate, it's tough to do. So how do we remain competitive? Again, you know, I think first of all, to go back to the last question, try not to use energy if you don't need it. Be as frugal as you can, while still obviously giving your greenhouse crop the energy that it needs to grow well. So, you know, whether electricity is, you know, 3 cents a kilowatt or 20 cents a kilowatt, and I think we've seen all of that in Ontario in the last couple of years, depending on how much you use and what kind of a customer you are. Whether it's 3 cents or 20 cents a kilowatt, it's too expensive if you're wasting it. And that's kind of a principle that we've adopted here at Rosa Flora is, you know, don't waste any kilowatts. So the kilowatts that you do use, try to, you know, extract as much value out of the energy that you're purchasing as possible. So specifically as it relates to combined heat and power, I think, yeah, this webinar speaks exactly to answering that question, in that why do we have combined heat and power? Because we know, for example, if we bring in natural gas to our farm and we produce both electricity and we produce heat with the same piece of equipment, you know, let's say a Caterpillar genset, we're going to use that every cubic meter of natural gas that we bring in. I know in our case, we're running typically 44 to 45% electrical efficiency and almost 50% thermal efficiency by the time I take all my high grade and low grade heat off. So without a doubt, I'm over 90% efficiency. I'm well above 90% with our Caterpillar engines when I add up my heat and my electricity. So that's one of the ways to remain competitive. I know a lot of the lower cost jurisdictions may not incent that type of technology to be adopted. Ontario has been a good place to bring that technology to, and I think to the credit of our local utilities and even our governments, they've recognized that combined heat and power is a good way to be efficient. Some of the jurisdictions that we compete with, especially down south, maybe haven't adopted that as easily. And certainly in our case, we don't just compete with, you know, other, say, Canadian or American growers. We compete with Central and South America, and they definitely have an energy advantage, obviously, on us if, you know, if they're growing product that doesn't require heat or light because they've got good conditions. Yeah, that does make it difficult. Having said that, our cost per acre, as Paul has indicated too, and our energy per acre has gotten so sharp in the last 5 to 10 years, and growers have done a really good job to to improve their yield per square meter. So if our energy cost per square meter have stayed the same or gone down, and our quality and our yield per square meter has gone up, that certainly is a really good way to keep ourselves competitive.
Right. Okay.
There's a question for the panel from the audience. What percentage of your total product cost is electricity cost?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll field that first. Yeah, so what is the ratio of the total cost of electricity? Yeah, that's a hard one to answer again, and I'll answer it partially by saying in the last several years, Rosa Flora has brought power in from the grid, for example, anywhere from 3 cents to 20 cents. So it's such a wide range that obviously at the upper end, our electricity costs are super, super high at 20 cents a kilowatt. At 3 cents, yeah, that's very, very attractive. The second big variable is, and it moves around a lot as well, is not the price of natural gas. Natural gas has in the last 20 years moved all over the place as well. And thankfully, we've been operating in an environment where natural gas has been fairly reasonable. Having said that, things like carbon pricing have now come into the picture. So I'm not probably answering the question as fully as the questioner wants me to, but I'd say if I had to guess, in general, energy and greenhouses could be, they're generally the second highest cost after labor. That's one way to answer it, I suppose.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, Paul, do you have any comments on?
I'll comment first on the energy cost. Yeah, you're spot on there, Ralph. Labor's number one by far, and growing. It's just a struggle to keep good people, and salaries are increasing, and it's extremely competitive in our area here. So yeah, for sure, labor's number one. Definitely energy is number two, but for us anyway, there's a really big gap between labor and energy. Like our energy, electricity and gas all in, I'm just going to kind of blue sky something, probably in the 12 to 14% range of our gross sales. So it's a player, and it's a big number, but it's one of many big numbers in our deal anyway. Electricity for us, it's probably not as significant with us as it is with you. But I think that may change for us because we're just getting into lights now, where you've been lighting for decades. We're just getting into it on a large scale now. So, but yeah. So, and back to your first question there, Megan, about the competitiveness. As Ralph was talking, I was thinking, man, I don't even know how to answer that, because there's times when we're not competitive. We can't be. But I think the bottom line to being competitive is to get more out with less in, just like anything else. And for us, what I've noticed over the last several years is the productivity. More pieces for less cost, comes from economy of scale, comes from installing lights, little nickels and dimes here that all adds up. But the bottom line, I don't know if we are competitive at all times. Like we produce product here 365 days a year. That's seamless production. And there's just times of the year where we cannot compete. Most of the time, obviously, that's in the winter time. And like what you alluded to there before, Ralph, like we're global. Like we have Spanish pressure. We have Mexican pressure. That's the biggest one for us. European pressure, you name it. Like the last couple of years have been a little bit different with the coronavirus. The air freight's been very difficult to get. But before Corona, just load a plane. You drop a load of cukes into Pearson there, and you can make money at it. So it's tough. And bottom line, I don't think we can be competitive every week of the year. But we have to produce all the time because we can't lose our customer base. And as you know, Ralph, you can't just stop a greenhouse and start it up again. You can stop it really quick, but the challenge is to get it running again, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you're bang on, Paul. And then, yeah, as you're saying that, yeah, maybe I should, yeah, I'll add to my response in that, yeah, we do grow similarly. Yeah, we grow 12 months of the year. And I didn't even think to respond that way because part of it is who you are. When you grow up on a farm as a farmer, you just know there's certain times of the year where you're not making money. And maybe not everybody's used to that, but that is, for us, that's life.
It's just
and
life.
certainly in some of the more expensive months of the year, November and December for sure, where you're putting a lot of inputs into your greenhouse and not necessarily paying for all those inputs in your sales in November and December. But certainly for us on the floral side, we're building our crop for February, March, April, May. And if we don't operate, 24/7, 365, we don't have the economies of scale to make it work. So thankfully, I can say with thanks, it's been, 40 plus years, and every year we have been profitable. I will say that, but if you broke down, the months within all of those years, you're not always profitable. So that's kind of the nature of the beast in terms, that's what guys like Paul and myself have kind of accepted, getting into the game that we're playing. There will be months of the year where you're scratching your head going, what am I doing here? But there's other months of the year where, we're in the right game.
Oh, for sure. And the thing is, you have to be ready. Like you can't follow the market. You can't plant your crop when the market's hot. You have to ship it. So you have to produce all the time and just take the good with the bad.
And certainly, I think to add to the CHP side of the conversation for this webinar is having the ability to produce heat and electricity on site does give you another lever to pull so that you are there when the market's there. And if the grid prices, get real high, you can self-generate it. It just gives you another tool as a grower to try to control those costs. You might not always be happy with those costs, but when you're making your own power, you are at least in control of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like Class A is a winner right now, but how long is it going to last?
Yeah.
Will it be there in a year? Probably in one form or the other, but it won't be. I'm sure it's not going to get more lucrative, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's probably a good guess. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, thanks, guys. That's really, really informative. Very cool. I was thinking while you're talking that also, there's a cost to, because the growth demand is so large right now in your neck of the woods, in the greenhouse space in general. There's a cost to also bringing in transmission and building new infrastructure to, satisfy the electricity needs of everyone. So further down the road, is electricity likely going to get cheaper? So that's exactly what you're talking about, is that, it makes sense to me that at least gives you some control over your costs, whether or not it ebbs and flows a little bit. You may be protected in the future from higher rates. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So this is a good segue because we've been touching a little bit on CHP and whatnot, but certainly there's a lot happening in this space, and you guys may not necessarily have implemented every new technology, but when it comes to either wind or solar or any type of emerging or new technology that you're seeing coming down the pipe, we're just curious. Have you considered anything? Are you doing anything? What do you think makes sense for a greenhouse application? So Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, I don't really know, like we talked about this briefly at our dress rehearsal. I don't really know much about hydrogen. Was that one of your questions here? Sorry, I can't find where was that?
No, well, certainly we'll probably touch on hydrogen because it may come up, but more so wind and solar. But we want to start with Ralph, and then Paul, you can try and sort out your notes there.
Ralph.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked, Megan. We in 2006, actually, we were because of high electricity prices, we were one of the early adopters of large-scale wind generation in Ontario. We made the decision in 2006 to purchase a 600 kilowatt wind turbine. This was kind of before the days where we as Ontarians got used to seeing wind turbines on our landscapes, but we put one up in 2006, I don't want to say on a whim, but, just partially out of wanting to understand and know how that would work, and partially in response to just saying we've got to do some more self-generation, and wind might be part of the whole picture for us. So we put the wind turbine up. We put it up behind the meter. So interestingly, we were a greenhouse operator who had wind power behind the meter, but it was also grid connected. So when the wind was really blowing and our base load was really low, which isn't often now, but back in 06, for example, if we would have had a base load of 400 kilowatts just to run bare bones operation, and the wind was really blowing and we were making 600 kilowatts, we would be exporting, say, 200 kilowatts in that case. So it was an interesting project, and it's a project that's alive today. It's here. Wind has its place, but I think, as many of us know, it's got some advantages. It's also got many disadvantages. The cost of wind, has quite a range. As a grower, certainly, if I need electricity and the wind's not blowing, that's obviously a major disadvantage. It's something that you can't, just count on all the time. For us, it was, kind of a piece in the bigger energy puzzle. So that's been there for 14 years now, and it works, right? It is a sound technology that works. The investment is usually quite high with wind up front, but your cost of energy is good. The wind is at this point, I don't want to say it too loud, but at this point, the wind is still pretty free in Ontario. We haven't been charged for it yet. So it's a piece for us, just a small piece of the puzzle with saying, hey, what can we do with wind? The other piece to the question was solar. We didn't actively participate in any of the solar programs in the province. Our position was that, hey, we were focusing on some other things, when a lot of that was offered. And as growers, we kind of joked and we said, we've already got, 40 or 50 acres of solar panels called greenhouses, and we're harvesting the sun's energy that way. We don't have any experience with solar here per se. So that's kind of talking about wind and solar. The other, I guess, maybe indirectly related, new technologies. As it relates to new technologies, the big one for us as growers who are using lights are things like LEDs. That may come up later in a question or in the conversation, but when I hear about new technologies in energy and greenhouses, that's one that does come up a lot. And many greenhouse growers have adopted LED technology to try to get more value from the energy they're buying in terms of translating that energy into photosynthetic light for crops to grow. So I would add LEDs to kind of that, partially in answering that question.
Great. Okay. All right, Paul, anything to add to that?
Yeah, not much. Like solar, it's really not a fit for us. Wind, we kind of looked into it probably 10 years after you installed yours there, Ralph, and it just kind of wasn't real exciting. We don't really know much about that. I don't know really anything about hydrogen, other than I heard at one time there was a project going in the States, but I never heard a peep about it since that. And CHP for us, that's the future. We looked a little bit into biogas, like recycling some of we have a lot of waste. Like we have thousands of tons of waste every year because we have a lot of organic matter coming out of the greenhouse. It just didn't fit. Like it's all costly. It's relatively low volumes, so we just kind of didn't really investigate that too much further. One thing that Ralph brought up, LEDs, like for us, that's all we're installing. Like we have a range with HPS in our propagation, which suits a need there, but that's not the future of lighting, in my opinion. And one thing that we're adopting is we're actually getting into what they call more of a localized inner light. Like we're not hanging our lights, 14, 18 feet in the air. We're putting them down where the crops are and moving them with the crops. That's also a big energy reducer, or big incentive to install lights in general. That's and again, there's all kinds of revenue streams or money grabs, for lack of a better term, out out there from the ISO on those programs as well. So kind of all fits together.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. All right, so I think we have one more question. So let's talk about finance. So do you guys, either of you have any thoughts around financing options for, whether it's CHP or wind or whatever we're talking about here, for the greenhouse market? I believe you both have invested yourselves in your equipment, but if you can just speak to maybe how you came to that decision.
I can tell you how I do it.
Sure.
It's
Okay,
just
Paul.
for us, it's out of the operating line. We don't really break it out or anything. We just lump it in.
Yeah.
We keep it really simple. It's out of our operating line, and that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't turn it out or anything.
So yeah, similarly, I think again, it kind of probably goes back, Megan, to who we are as growers and farmers. Is if we need something, we buy it. And and that's kind of the way we operate. Energy is one of, as we talked about earlier, energy is one of those line items on our budget where we know it's a certain percentage, whether it's 10 or 20%. We know what we're going to spend a year, and our principle has been, hey, if this is what we feel we need to spend per year. Yeah, do I buy it in terms of, is it natural gas? Is it electricity? Is it biomass? Like what, where do I want to spend those energy dollars? And if I spend those energy dollars, for every energy dollar I spend, how do I make sure that I'm creating as much value as possible? And in the case of investing and making decisions to invest in CHP or energy projects, it's been a matter of us together, in the business, just looking at it and saying, does this make business sense? Does it give us a payback that we're satisfied with? And if the answer is yes, we will self-finance it and roll it into the operation, similar to what Paul said, the way we would, spend any other operating dollar.
Great. Okay, that makes sense. Right, Joe, do you have any comments to add? And Joe oh, you're muted, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I went to unmute myself and I stopped my video, but let me know the quality of the sound. I've got great download speeds, but my upload speed sucks.
No, you're good. I was going
audio-
to say the phrase of 2020 and 2021 is you're muted. That's the #1 phrase. So at least every call, there's got to be one. Anyway, you're good. Sounds good.
So I picked up a few things there just to kind of wrap up some of the advice of Ralph and Paul, not the least of which is some of the technologies that Toromont represents offers our customers flexibility, I believe is the word that Ralph had used. It's I often tell my clients that the way they need to look at the energy business is that it does fluctuate. Gas prices fluctuate. Electricity prices, of course, fluctuate. Almost worse, government regulation fluctuates. So, the next group of politicians that get in there, you have a different view of the energy market and want to make some changes, and consequently, millions of dollars of investment become maybe suspect or something like that. But the way to look at some of these technologies, in particular combined heat and power or cogeneration, whatever you want to call it, is that it gives you that flexibility of looking at two utility energy supplies, gas and electricity, and leverage the technology to be able to bounce back and forth as to which one is going to be most cost effective for you to utilize in a given period of time. It does require significant knowledge of what's going on in the electricity market and trying to define where they're headed. You know, are prices going to escalate? Prices of natural gas, if everybody recalls, back in the mid 2000s, spiked, and you know, you couldn't justify an investment in combined heat and power because there was no payback relative to, say, purchasing grid electricity. Prices are relatively good now, but there has been, as Paul has indicated, some adjustments that have been made regarding Class A power pricing that causes you to take a moment to think about whether that becomes a better solution than it would be to self-generate on site. I think what we can say is, given a cogeneration plant on site, it gives you that flexibility to be able to leverage it for the lowest possible cost, input cost into your crops. It also arguably offers reliability and durability in the event of some sort of calamity. The one great benefit of the natural gas system is that it's a buried system. It isn't exposed to rain and weather and falling trees and all that sort of thing. And in the 2003 blackout, for example, over 90% of the gas system stayed up and running, all the way from Alberta to Ontario, independent of the larger grid outages that the Northeast continent suffered. So that gives you a kind of view in terms of resiliency that on-site power generation can offer you. But the biggest point I picked up from both Paul and Ralph is the being energy efficient is step one. The best kilowatt is the one that you don't have to purchase or make yourself. Finding those accumulations, I think Paul referred to it as it all adds up, nickels and dimes here. Finding those accumulations of where electricity is being wasted, or gas is being wasted, or thermal energy is being wasted, all come back together to being a more competitive greenhouse operator, a more competitive product producer in the marketplace. And you know, before you invest in cogeneration, look at what you can do to save energy first, and then look at other energy technologies that could benefit your operation. That's it, Megan.
Great. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Sharjeet.
There's one more question from the audience. In reference to the green generation, cost of hydro is going to be high. And how about carbon tax impact on the greenhouses?
Any takers?
Yeah, I don't think I caught the entire question, but I think I got the gist of the end of it. That, you know, the reference to carbon tax and how it impacts greenhouses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's costs are going up. As you know, as people who are in the agricultural sector, there are some breaks that we get on the carbon tax now. As we've indicated in the past, who knows what the future brings? Will that remain there? I think we all recognize we're living in a world where there is a cost to carbon, and we all have to bear that, whether we're in greenhouses or not. So, yeah, the costs are going up. So it's just as it relates to carbon tax, it's just another for us. We look at it as another reminder to say that be efficient and use those kilowatts wisely, because whether it's called carbon tax, global adjustment, extra transmission charges, you know, we all see, you know, energy bills that have a whole bunch of line items on them. Sometimes we can't read them all and understand them all, but carbon tax is another example of saying, yeah, there's a price to carbon. We all are going to bear that in some way, shape, or form. So for me, it's another reminder to say, use your energy wisely. And if you can adopt policies and procedures and invest in equipment that does that effectively, then make that decision.
Great. Okay, any other comments on that? I think we have there's one question from Paul Charanjit. Is class 43.1 write down for CHP available to greenhouse growers?
40.1.
43.1, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's an accelerated depreciation allowance on taxes, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, so you hit a certain energy efficiency, then that investment in that energy efficiency can have accelerated depreciation and reduce your tax burden.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm unfamiliar with that. I've never come across that.
Okay. I'm just looking to see, so we have another question. Is there any opportunity to recycle waste biomass to a syngas to reduce nat gas requirements for generating engines?
I'll take a stab at that.
Sure.
We do use biomass here at our greenhouse operation. We use it, we invested in biomass energy in 2003, 2004. As Joe had indicated in some of his comments earlier, that was in a time when natural gas prices were getting really high. We made the decision to invest in 3 biomass combustion systems. Those are thermal systems only, so we do not use that biomass to create electricity. But certainly the technology is available to take biomass, make low pressure steam, or other technologies to take that biomass and turn it into electricity. That isn't something we've done, but we do use waste wood product here at our facility, convert it to hot water, and we use that hot water to warm our greenhouse. So biomass is again another example of a technology and a piece of our energy picture which helps the overall picture look a little better.
Yeah, Ralph, what's the numbers look like on the biomass versus natural gas with today's pricing?
Yeah, it's a lot of people have asked us that in the last year or two because it's things again keep moving. Right now, Paul, I would not build that biomass plant likely at today's gas prices. Gas is attractive enough where I probably would make that decision. But given that we've got that facility has been there since 2004, 2005, it is more favorable. Biomass, converting waste wood to biomass and using it for hot water purposes is still, on a dollar for dollar, from a fuel dollar perspective, is still more attractive than wood. But to make that same investment in all of that overhead today would be more difficult, certainly, than it was in 2003, 4, and 5.
Mm-hmm. Not exactly sure, but I know there's some large growers that did invest in biomass here too, and I'm pretty sure they're not running them anymore. I think one of the larger growers, he quit this winter. He just went all back to gas. Yeah,
and it's some guys have taken that, made that decision. You're absolutely right. I think it depends a lot on what your other options are. In our case, we have 3 units running. It's a large operation that, again, the overhead is there. I've got all the equipment there. We do the processing ourselves in terms of the biomass. So we took that step and we're running with it. If you had to do it today again, it would be difficult. Or if you had a smaller biomass operation under today's circumstances, it might make sense to give that a breather for a year or so and just bring the gas in from your local utility.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, guys, we're just about at the time limit. I don't see any other questions that have come through. I don't know if there's this one lingering. I'm not sure if it was addressed. No, I think we did answer that. Okay. Yeah, I think that's everything. All right. So right on time. So guys, thank you so much. This was really, really interesting. Really, really cool to listen to both of the initiatives you guys have taken for energy solutions. I just want to let everyone know again that this is recorded and we will send it out to all the attendees. I want to give a big thank you to our guest speakers, Ralph and Paul. And again, please go buy those cucumbers, go buy some flowers. They're literally, they cannot be beat. I was looking at pictures. I'm going to buy my mom some of your flowers I'm going to try and get a hold of it for Mother's Day. I encourage everyone with a mother, go get some flowers, go get some cucumbers. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time today. And we'll see you in the next Let's Talk Energy session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take
everyone.
care, everyone.
Take
Okay.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.